How's it going, Bob?
Oh, doing great.
You're ready to tackle guns and finish the whole problem once and for all.
You bet. Yeah, that's how to do it.
Yeah, it sounds like a piece of cake. We'll just stop giving people licenses to carry guns, and situation will sort of solve itself. But it seems to be a lot more complex than that. Obviously, the situation. Oh, here we go. You've got a. What sort of rifle is that?
An old shotgun.
It's an old shotgun. Okay.
Yeah, I do have a Mauser pistol also. These are both really antiques that I inherited from my father. I wouldn't know what end of it to aim, but
I mean, we'll get to the personal bits and pieces about the use of gun personally, or what do we feel about them personally. But let's try to tackle the situation, because the United States has got a very unique position in terms of the mass shooting and the way guns are being used, especially in the United States. And statistics, the United States stand out in a particular way, and especially when you add the recent trend of the mass shooting within schools and primary schools as well. That's going to be something quite disturbing for anyone. Imagine you're a father at home, or you're a grandfather, and you just fear for the worst. I mean, the news coming to the parents beforehand, it must have been devastating. Imagine you're a father and you're waiting for your child just to hear some good news that the situation's been resolved, and you're fearing the worst. These must have been the worst 45 minutes in anybody's life.
the only thing I can think of that might be worse is these hellish situations where someone's child disappears and you don't know what the heck happened. If that had happened to me, I don't know if I could have survived it. That would drive you insane, I should think. And I'm just imagining what might be happening to your child. That would perhaps be even worse, but this, tough to top. This is just,
because the one you're proposing has no closure probably at the end of it.
But
at
this,
least,
my gosh.
It's we're humans, so we're still, we're trying to rationalize things. You and I, we're trying to talk about things, but there comes times where we turn into a sack of emotions, or maybe an ape, a dangerous animal to defend the lives of those who we love. We understand that quite intricately, but the problem is there's so many guns in the United States now. Is it too late to fix anything? I mean, the Second Amendment has been installed from pretty much day one, and it's been a part of the DNA in the United States. Is it too little, too late? Is there going back on this at all?
Well, I think the situation can be mitigated if the government or governments in different places would only do what has been marked out for years in terms of fortifying schools with security and safety. That to have armed guards, veterans perhaps, there just to make everybody feel safe and secure, and as the first line of defense. I don't know why they can't do that, but instead we have ridiculous things like advertising that this or that school is a gun-free zone. In other words, come and get us. It just seems incredibly stupid to me. And also the mental health angle, when there you hear every time this happens that the person the assassin, the murderer, was already on somebody's chart, that he was known to be unbalanced and even threatened to do this very thing. This latest guy, that's exactly what happened. I think 4 years ago, he had predicted in detail what he would do in this year. And yet they, I guess, counselors talked to him, but they let him go. Like, why on earth? And there are many cases like that. So if you know that somebody is likely a a perpetrator, then do something about it. It can't be that difficult, especially since surveillance is now to the point of being like Big Brother in 1984. So I think that is really the way to go on this. You can try to figure out what the causes are, but I don't know. I mean, it's plausible to suggest, for instance, that violent video games are inspiring this, but I don't know if that's true. And that brings up another big issue of freedom of choice on many things. Are you going to start censoring rap lyrics because that could lead somebody to rape? Well, I wouldn't be surprised if it did, but who knows? And do you really want to go down that road with censorship? Same thing here. And one thing I think would not help the situation is to have stricter gun laws and ultimately to disarm the law-abiding population. There's this unbelievable, to me, failure to put two and two together. If you're talking about criminals who will, by hook or by crook, get a gun. And in the United States, most guns that are used in crimes are stolen. Nobody went through a background check or even bought them at a show or a store. So to say that, well, we're going to make it tougher for people to buy guns to use in hunting or whatever, what's the point of that? You're just making the law abiding into sitting ducks. There are many of these situations where if somebody was armed on the scene, they could have made short work of the murderers and so on. So I personally think that, and when you look at places like Chicago, where they have the strictest gun laws in the United States, they have this ever burgeoning, fantastic murder rate. Like, it doesn't seem to help. So why have more of the same ineffective, futile, conscience-salving measures? Which it's kind of like a virtue signaling thing. You can say you've done something, but it will not help. And then one other factor is that most murders are, from what I hear, are committed with hammers. And perhaps second is knives of one kind or another. And then once you're into guns, it's not even the rifles. It's mostly handguns. And if you ban all of these, you're just making it easier for these violent crimes to erupt, because now you don't have to worry if you're a felon, a monster, and it's open season on the innocent. So I think, and now why do people persist in asking for disarmament, which seems to me is the ultimate goal? Well, I think it's because and why do some actually propose repealing the Second Amendment, the right to keep and bear arms? I think it's like, why is that amendment there? What is it trying to safeguard? Well, it says in order to maintain an effective militia, to keep the state free, the citizens have the right to keep and bear arms. Well, a militia is not the same thing as a conscripted army. It's more of an informal thing. And the point, I think, is to make it possible for Americans to do what their forefathers did, throwing off the yoke of Great Britain. Our government is not to be trusted in any way anymore, and and who knows what they're eventually going to try. You cannot let the government disarm you. Totalitarian regimes have done that before as a preparation for utterly subjugating the populace. And the way things are going, I think that is a real danger and very likely the real motivation for those who want to really disarm everybody.
Bob, don't you think it's more of a situation of make do with what we've got? Because that's why I've called it too little, too late, because the amount of guns in everybody's hands in the United States is unprecedented. It's just, I think per capita has got to be the highest in the world. And you cannot guarantee if you're going to disarm certain people that the real bad people will actually let go of their guns. So you're going to end up with the vast majority or the horrible people possessing guns because it's not declared in the first place, so they won't have to give it up. And those who are actually licensed will end up giving it up, and these are the good people, and you end up then with a problem where you can't even defend yourself.
Exactly.
But that's why I call it too little, too late. But if you were one of the founders, if you were one of the very founders, and the stats do not lie, and numbers speak louder than words. A country like where I'm living right now, Australia, which didn't have a very clean history. Now, it was supposed to be the convicts going from the England and Ireland and all these sort of countries settling in Australia, which have some sort of tendencies to do crazy things. And Europe, the numbers are just absolutely astounding when you compare them to the United States. And the mass shooting or the shooting or killing using guns are in the tens per year, if that. So if you were to go back in time and you were one of the founding fathers, what would you do?
The same thing. I mean, the ever-present threat, sometimes not obvious or acute, requires the citizenry to have defensive arms. And that is certainly true today. And the catch-22 for those who would disarm the populace is a serious attempt to do that would boomerang, speaking of Australia, and you would ignite the very civil war you hope to avoid. People would not give up those guns. And so you're just going to have a bloodbath if anybody ever seriously tries that. Confiscation. That's why they do it piecemeal, so that it won't be quite as obvious, but like by more and more restrictive laws.
But Bob, so this is the founding stage of the United States. So now confronted with the numbers, the countries that have adopted civilians don't have guns or have very limited access to guns with very, very strict laws. They show numbers. Homicide using a gun or semi-automatic or mass shooting in schools is when you compare them to the United States, are way lower. So if the analogy is true, why then wouldn't you see way more violence in countries where the right to bear arm isn't present?
Well, just yesterday, now I don't know if this is true or not, but I heard a pundit on TV say that in Australia, once the guns were confiscated, shootings did decline, but other violent crime shot way up. Because I don't know why, but most murders are committed with knives, as I say, and hammers and so on. So it's not like there's no alternative if you're evil and want to kill people. And again, the idea of confiscating defensive weapons or hunters' weapons, because there are though way too many, still a tiny minority of gun owners doing these awful atrocities, you're doing the classic liberal fallacy of making the exception into the rule. Because some jerk had explosives in his sneakers, everybody has to take their shoes off as they get on board the airport. It defies reason. And this would be an especially dangerous case because I certainly do not trust the government. It seems to me that the motive here is to make rebellion against the government impossible. If they had done that in colonial times, there would have been no revolution to establish.
But that's Bob. That's why I don't really sort of subscribe to the emotional aftermath of any situations like this. The emotions are running quite high, and people are not making rational sense. And I can understand it. People are hurt, but when you think about it, if somebody is going to be a killer, somebody's prefrontal lobe cortex is damaged, they don't feel empathy. They're about to kill a bunch of people, and they don't care about being killed. Even saying that this school has got no weapons will have no bearings in them because they know probably at the end of this they're going to be dead, and they're okay with it. So they go on a killing spree, and if not killed, they're probably going to end up turning the gun on themselves anyway. They're gone. But you must agree with me on this one here. Carrying an automatic machine gun will be completely different than turning into a school with just a knife. Because with just turning with a knife, yes, you might have few victims, but you still have to physically overpower others, and the damage inflicted by a knife will be considerably less than a machine gun.
Well, people aren't generally. I don't know that you can buy an actual machine gun for recreation
or semi-automatic rifle, let's say.
Well, that's where you have to have more security in the school and in other public places, so that if some person comes in with arms like that and have no business being there, you need somebody that will take them out. I mean, it's not like, well, here's this guy wearing body armor and having an automatic rifle. I wonder if he's maybe just a salesman or something. No, you know what's going to happen unless you shoot him first, which shouldn't be that difficult. And I mean, like when right after 9/11, there were armed National Guardsmen in the airports. And I was glad to see it. I didn't think this meant, oh boy, we're in some sort of South American police state. No, it was a crisis period and you needed these people. And I don't think it would be a problem. In fact, it will head off a problem of totalitarian takeover in the long run. But I don't see the problem with having armed guards protecting people in schools, libraries, hospitals, any place.
Yeah, it would be. I mean, maybe there is no point of trying to the hypothetical situation of trying to, like, if I was one of the founding fathers in the United States, I would choose to do things differently, and maybe it would have meant a different society. But maybe from the word go, the United States nature and very specific nature meant that there might be a conflict from the very beginning because of the North, the South, the different settlements, different cultural aspects are inevitably going to lead to a conflict. And therefore, maybe it's within the DNA in the United States to always have that problem. Okay, so maybe now we're looking at minimization rather than fixing it all together, because I think it's way too late. The amount of guns, and I think this argument is not going to be, it's not going to work, because you're going to end up most of the guns and most of the criminals are unregistered, unlicensed anyway. So you're going to end up with the good people having nothing to defend yourself with. So it's a horrible decision. But I'm sure you would agree with me. Something needs to be done, because the amount of mass shooting, I think 27 school shooting only this year, and 8 mass shootings in the United States only this year. That's a lot in a first world country that's supposed to be run by proper government. It's not a failed country. It's not Nigeria, or no, it's not like one of those weird countries where there's militias everywhere in Africa. This is a first world. This is a superpower, a first world country. The world is looking up to the United States, saying, "Well, you need to show us the way sometimes here, but how can you do so when your own house is not particularly in order?"
Oh, well, yeah, but that you can describe that from many directions. I don't know that the world does look up to the United States anymore. I sure
Right.
don't. It's a pig pen. It's a sty. And the government is completely corrupt. They're destroying the economy on purpose, et cetera, et cetera. In fact, it is so bad that some suggest that these school shootings are somehow manipulated by the government, in the same way that, for instance, during the Black Lives Matter riots, the police were told not to intervene. Why? Well, if they do that, the craziness becomes conceivable that they have a hand in this as well, to use it as an excuse to have a backlash against the Second Amendment. I don't know if that's true, but our government does similar other things that are nefarious and unbelievable, and I put nothing past them anymore.
Yeah.
It's just,
What about the reasonable approach of stricter rules, psychological profiling, background, stronger background checks?
Oh yeah, I don't see any problem with that.
Starting with a mild, like a manual handgun for a good 2-3 years until the person has got a good sort of track record of good use of that gun, and then you can upgrade to something even better when you've displayed that you can. Something like that. What do you think of approach like that?
Well, ideally, that seems like a real good idea, but we already have such things, and they don't work because the authorities appear to be incompetent. I mean, like these recent things, like this creep the other day, they knew about his psychological aberration. Why don't they do anything to enforce the laws that are there? It's so in like Plato's Republic or Thomas More's Utopia, it might work, but until we get the government out of the hands of these corrupt incompetents, who knows what's going to happen next?
Yeah, I mean, do you think then the Republican at some point had the upper hand in government, but the problem was still there. So do you think? Okay, maybe the Democrats, they're not the best in sort of dealing with that, but were the Republicans any better when they were in charge?
I don't know, but I wouldn't assume so. Though they didn't try to disarm the population. They didn't go that far. And in fact, I remember, I think Kerry and Hillary and others were saying not long ago that gun control is dead. There's not popular support for it. So the winds have changed with both groups. There's no way to know who's going to opportunistically take which side next. So I guess if they really did these things that are already on the books, that would, like what we're proposing here, has been supposedly enacted years ago, but they are not doing anything about it.
Yeah, to me, I'm an outsider, so I look at that and I'm thinking here, this is a patriotic case. This is a situation where bipartisan, the two parties need to actually stop using this to advance political agendas
Mhm.
and say, well, this is a problem to the United States. This is a problem for all of us here. We need to come up with something that is better for the future of our kids. Because to me, this is more than just a quick political gain. I'm sure you'd agree if you're a grandfather or you're you this sort of news when it comes in. When in Australia, we heard it on the radio, and immediately I felt I didn't feel good for the rest of the day. I've just put myself in these kids' shoes. Apparently, one of the girls, aged 9 or 10, had to cover herself in the blood of her
Yes.
best. I mean, imagine the trauma for life. Imagine that scene for that girl.
Mm.
I mean, imagine these moments when this is all unfolding. And you're right, the incompetence of the police sitting there for 40 minutes and, twiddling their. What the hell is going on here? I mean, to me, maybe you need to break protocol at this point, and it takes one brave officer to take him down, like what we've seen, something from the movies, or do something crazy, because 22 people are about to be killed, and it could have been more, but I don't know what happened there.
Yeah, it's I think in the late 70s, the philosopher and novelist Colin Wilson, or I guess he said Colin Wilson, he said we're entering savage new times. And I guess the old times are pretty savage too, but it does seem like his prediction has come true and things are degenerating into the old West. And however, this can't be isolated from the soaring crime rates in the major cities in the United States, which seems to result from these so-called bail reform laws these ghetto hooligans can't afford bail like a rich guy can, so let's just let them out. Like, what the hell? This is George Soros and his funded prosecutors at work. And this guy, he's like a James Bond villain. He's trying to bring down the United States avowedly, and it's working pretty well. And so that there need like particular measures of new gun restrictions are really a kind of useless Band-Aid on a much bigger problem. The West in general, but especially the United States, is really descending into chaos, and it's bizarre ideologies in control that are responsible. It seems pretty clear to me, and so you have a systemic problem. And I'm hoping once these nuts are driven out in the next couple of elections, maybe sanity will be restored. That doesn't mean perfection, but you're never going to have that given what the human race is.
Yeah. Well, last week we talked about pacifism, and I think they link quite nicely because last week we were talking about the opposites of this here, and it looks like we're dealing with human tendencies, and it looks like men with the adrenaline gland, it's way too big, and our empathy hasn't fully evolved yet. Looks like we're going to be fighting, and as you mentioned, once you've disarmed people in Australia, some other type of crimes have shut up because maybe bare knuckle fights and stuff like that. But you gotta agree that if humanity is going to have a bit of an aggressive nature inbuilt into it, we're animals after all, then giving people the tools to settle their differences in a way that is not terminal, something that is, UFC, cage fight, a bit of a punch up is completely different than the gunslinger situation where, Quick Draw McGraw, sort of, the Western movies where everybody watched the United States sort of emerging, and this was it's kind of a scene, a familiar scene in the United States DNA, and it seems from day one the way to settle differences has evolved from beyond the pawn shop to straight away to guns, and this has sort of stayed with the United States, and to the point where the number of guns right now in the United States are they're frightening. And that's why I've turned back to the initial conditions, and I said, look, okay, looks like we're violent species. We're going to be fighting, but wouldn't fighting with tools that non-lethal be preferable to giving people, especially when you can kill multiple people in one sitting, and being completely detached. Remember, when you sink the knife in somebody's gut, has a completely different feeling and apparently different sensation than shooting from afar. A detached killing is less psychologically draining, but when you actually kill somebody with your own hands and you've got their bloods on you, it's got a different type of feeling, and it's usually individualistic. But when you can kill people, that's why in wars there are certain weapons are banned at the moment, because the amount of harm it can do at a completely detached method. There's no bravery, there is no nobility. You know, a noble fight is when you're face to face with somebody, you square up and you stand up your ground, and it's a fair game. But when you take an advantage, you don't have to be the smartest or the strongest. You just have to have the bigger gun, and you won. Maybe that sitting wasn't ideal.
Maybe that's
the setting, the initial setting of enabling too many guns from the word go.
Well, I'm not sure what led to the multiplication of weapons. I mean, that would tell us a lot if we knew. I don't know if we can infer that from the simple fact that a lot of people are armed, because a whole lot of them are just sportsmen or hunters or target shooters. I have no idea what the percentages are, but if we knew, that might give us some kind of...
Do you think, Bob, the United States being an attraction to a lot of immigration, it drove a lot of people, especially from the South America, the cartel. You get all these mafias. You watched the 1920s and gangs of Chicago, and the Italians and the Irish and the Japanese yakuzas, and almost like the United States ended up as a battleground for various gangs from all over the world at some point. What was obviously the attraction is, here's a country. It's a new one. We've already destroyed the one we left, or we're cast away or been outcast from the countries that we originally come from. We're going to go to this country, and it seems to be that they are a bit liberal and a bit, they allow a lot of freedoms, and these freedoms have been exploited and misused.
Yeah, and you're about to see a lot more of it with the degree to which the drug cartels are running the show at the border, with the tacit or maybe even the active collaboration of our stinking federal government. I mean, that is really it's already getting worse, and with violence and so on. And so I think it's going to get worse. And if the police remain as ineffective as they have during the riots and these standoffs and so on, you will inevitably have vigilante violence, because if the police won't protect you, you got to protect you. And that must happen. It's kind of frightening, but I think we're only going to see more and more of it.
Yeah.
That is.
Well, Jefferson here is saying it's very intricate. It's very unique to the United States, and that's what we said at the very beginning. A lot of non-Americans will not understand. I mean, the world is watching what's happening in the United States, and they think, well, what the hell is going on here? But they don't understand how the whole thing started. And I'm in agreement, because of the intricate situation within the United States and the amount of guns already. It's very difficult. I think disarmament would be kind of crazy at this point.
Yeah.
It's not going to work unless you guarantee that all the gangs and all the unofficial, unlicensed guns to actually be surrendered, which is, I don't think how you're going to enforce that. I'm
Yeah.
not sure how you're going to enforce that. That's why I think it's a bit too late. The only thing you could hope for is rational rules, a lot more background checks, and apply the laws. So if there is a school and as you mentioned, somebody's turning up with unconcealed weapon, obviously something is going down. So you got to act really quickly, and I was, so maybe this one might be down to personal judgments for a couple of entities here, but the problems still remain. It seems that, and I bet you in another 2 or 3 months we'll be talking about one of these episodes somewhere.
Probably. Yeah.
It is going to happen, and you don't know who is going to be the next victim. Imagine the next victim is a next of kin, and suddenly your whole worldview on this might change.
Yeah.
Because a neighbor, a good friend, a daughter, or anyone, and this happens to them, and you suddenly like, okay, well, we got to do something about it. And obviously, some people that maybe spoke about this already are people who have been victims, or their family members have been victims of these incidents. And it seems to be very, very, very complex. But what do you think, Bob, about the bipartisan conversation, where this is not a majority government conversation alone? This has to be a conversation done nationwide. Polls as well. I think the citizens need to have their views. I think there should be a referendum and a poll and an understanding of what people want, what the future of the United States is going to look like. Because as I said, it looks like from one of the very intricacies about the United States, it has been a very attractive destination for immigration. And you ended up with probably not the best bunch out of different cultures and establishing a certain way to live life in the United States. And it's evolved a bit, but it still carries the original DNA of I'm going to defend myself the best way I know, which is I'm going to point a gun at you if you're trying to threaten me.
Yeah, especially with the unrestricted illegal immigration. And similarly in Europe, though I guess it wasn't technically illegal there, they did overtly open the borders and got a whole lot of third world people. And for instance, in Germany and in England, there were huge increases in rapes and sexual assaults and so forth. But the governments hushed it up because they didn't want to be politically incorrect. Well, you can only take so much of that. And again, if the government is not going to do anything, the people eventually will, unless they're so decadent and cowardly that they'd rather just take it. Well, in this country, we've had nasty periods in the past of nativism where people thought, oh, those Chinese immigrants are taking our jobs, et cetera, et cetera. Well, that was nothing compared to this. And so, again, these people seem to have, the people in charge seem to have no sense of the implications of their policies, because they are really creating a situation where you're going to have nativism on steroids with not getting jobs because people from the third world are now here and they're going to get the jobs for a lot less pay and be happy about it. We're really in a tinder box, it seems to me, and it's probably going to get worse before it ever gets better. I don't know what the solution is to any of this, but at least we could try the security measures that are on the books but not enforced.
There are interesting discussion going in the chat here, and two opposing point of views, and interesting to watch this unfold in front of my own eyes. So Jefferson is saying a statistic that is never emphasized, much less mentioned, is the number of crimes prevented and the number of lives saved each day because good and responsible people happen to be armed.
Yes.
But then it was a good point, countered by kids love Satan, bogus argument. Countries that are not armed to the teeth don't have the gun murder that the US has. That's another good point. So the problem is the United States are not every other country. The way it was set up in a way that makes removing guns won't be possible. You can't have it. I mean, you tell me, Bob, is this ever possible? Do you think you can even control it?
No, any attempt to seize guns will only result in a civil war, or at least a bloodbath of resistance, even if it's not like a war with strategy and organized armies. Hell will break loose, and they will be causing the very thing they fear. That just will not work. I have to agree with what Jefferson says, that the mainstream media will purposely avoid telling you about instances where armed people manage to avert crimes and so forth, because they're in the pocket of the people that want to disarm the population. So there is like a propagandistic suppression of that very relevant information. And that, I think, really does not have much to do with the cultural heritage of the United States as being different from that of other countries. That is simply a question of selective and biased reporting of what's going on in ours. One other thing, I'd like to know what the murder rate is in these countries that are not armed to the teeth, because there are various ways of murdering people. And that seems to me.
So I've done a comparison between the United States and definitely the United States are the highest in the Western world by like a big number. So I agree. The guns sometimes will avert other crimes, but in other countries, these guns are mostly carried by the police force, an effective police force who will work professionally, and they've been trained to stop crimes in a controlled way. The problem is, if you started to be a police officer, you would think you'll have to go into a rigid sort of routine and training and background checks and psychological checks, every single thing to make you sort of qualify to be somebody to uphold the law of the country will be run. However, once you've made guns available to people with loose kind of checks, you never know. People threw in, and they went and talked about this guy who's never displayed any mental issues in the past or anything. But who knows what's going to happen in the future to anyone?
This latest one had definitely. It was on record with they sealed his record, since he did some of his mischief when he was technically a juvenile. But even so, they knew about threats he had made and so forth, and did nothing about it.
That's incompetence. Yeah, the few people need to be fired on the back of this, I think. If this is the case, easy.
But somebody they don't do it.
Yeah, no, they should. I mean, that is incompetence, and that's and there's a lot of lives lost. I think the United States is a lot too complex at this point. So I think probably the only logical thing you can think about, and this might take few generations to water down. It's not going to be immediate. It's going to be certain generations who would choose not to buy a gun anymore. And it has to happen organically. It has to happen because of a certain cultural shift in the mentality of the Americans. It cannot be imposed from the outside. It has to come from within, and it has to be a collective awareness sort of thing. It has to be together. It's done together. Just like, for example, how humanity is moving towards harming animals, and animal cruelty is becoming a thing all around the world at the same time. One of my moderators is a Spanish lady, and you know how the Spanish banned the bullfighting in the last few decades, and yet this was a huge thing in the culture. This was a cultural big thing, and almost like a marker for being a Spanish. And to be abandoned and to be relic of the past, you visit Spain nowadays, and they're kind of even ashamed of having that past. So humanity does advance, and can bank on that in the future. But for now, for right now, what can we do? And maybe we spend the next 10, 15 minutes and think we'll probably end it at that. What can we do, or what can you more likely to do as an American? What would you recommend the Americans to do for the next 10 to 15 years to slow down this slaughter and make it a little bit more controlled?
Well, I think especially more public security, especially at schools, which would not be difficult to do. There are plenty of people who would be happy to be guards there, veterans especially. And if they would do that, that could really make a difference. I don't see why they don't. Background checks, red flag laws. I understand there are problems with that, as with everything, but in principle, that certainly seems. I mean, there already are such things, but I don't see what's to complain about there. It's just that you mustn't make the exception into the rule. And like there is a kind of civilization, a civilizing process that can ultimately wind up with an effete population, what I call positive moral decadence, where you now have become so moral that it's like the rabbis said, don't be too quick to try to extinguish the evil inclination with which all humans are born, to enter a saintly state, because you may find you need the evil inclination in order to be able to fight Nazis, to execute murderers, etc. You may need this. Now, if the more evolved you are morally, the more you hate the thought of doing that stuff. But not everybody is on that level. And do you want to be party to extinguishing what light there is by letting these savages take over? Can't do that. It's an evil, but a lesser evil. I don't know how our moral evolution will deal with that.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, that's why you and I are not pacifists. I'm not a pacifist. You're not a pacifist, but it's the way you deal with it. You know, some countries have opted for this to be dealt with a professional force that call the police. You know, and there might be some citizens here and there who might have access to guns here and there, and they will be quite scrutinized, and that led to numbers that are reasonably dealt with in Australia, New Zealand, those sort of countries where these situations are a shocking event when they happen. When 3 or 4 people get killed in a shooting. I think the last massacre was the Port Arthur in Australia, in Tasmania, and that was 1996. So 1996 was the last mass shooting in Australia. So almost quarter of a century ago. And that led to stricter gun rules. After the massacre, the Port Arthur massacre in Tasmania, in Australia, there was a bit of a violence hike that you talked about, but there were more like fights and bars and knifing here and there. And then right down after a couple of years, things subsided, and you're lucky to hear about a stabbing or a gunshot, maybe once a year. It's incredible. I've been living here since 2006. I've never been to a fight, probably once. I've never had to fear for my life. we don't have this issue here. Schools don't have security in them because this will never occur to people. I don't know. It's just we live in a society where this sort of thing, we're not afraid at all to live life to its fullest. So I'm not sure where the answer is, and I think it's to do with the way the United States were established at some point, and the type of people they live within, and the type of culture. And there's so much going on. A bit too late, and I think it's too dangerous to withdraw this, because you will have very good people are left to defend themselves against horrible people with lots of guns. So it's not going to be wise to abandon guns. But I think there's going to be you're right, some security at critical places, especially where people cannot defend them, kids in school. However, for some reason, the scene of entering a school, there's a kiosk or like a little room with people, a couple of people with guns. It's kind of, you don't want to see that. You go to school, and the one thing you have in your head is you want to see kids playing freely in the garden, singing, happy, smiling, learning. And I know that this is disparate, but it's not ideal. What do you think?
Well, it used to be that kids were taught to look at the local policeman as a friend and guardian, and they carried guns, but it wasn't like they were a threatening presence. Now, of course, there is anti-police propaganda to try to make you think that they're all felons and so on, and that is socially suicidal. But I don't see why you couldn't have children assured that the armed guards are there to protect them. I don't think that would freak the kids out. They might feel more secure.
Yeah, but I understand it in the context of the current situation. But in a world where I live, for example, where that is non-event because that threat isn't there in the first place, I'm thinking as a kid, I probably would not want to even. I mean, you would use a gun to defend yourself, and this is the point I'm trying to make. What if there is no reason for you to defend yourself in the first place? Is it like the Chinese martial arts? They teach you the best way to avoid a punch is not to be there in the first place.
I think that's just sentimentalism. That's just not going to work.
In the United States, I agree, but it worked for the rest of the world.
I really wonder if that's true. I have no way of knowing, but I cannot believe that the world is filled with a bunch of adjacent utopias, except for here, the Forbidden Zone. There's all, like Mexico. Good God, what a hellhole that is. And plus these, like, Canada's becoming more fascistic, and I've heard Australia is too. I don't know, but I hear things related to the COVID nonsense that you see films about young women and old people in wheelchairs being wrestled to the ground because they weren't wearing masks.
These things do happen. Yeah. Look, these things do happen, and that's why I'm not utopian. I understand there are a few felonies happen here and there, punch-ups, but what I'm trying to avoid here is mass shootings, where a lot of innocent kids' lives are lost. But leaving a bar with a shiner because you've flirted with somebody else's girlfriend. Yes, that happens in Australia quite a lot. That's all right. You can live with that. You've learned your lesson. Next time, you chat a girl up and say, are you taken?
Well, yeah, that's a good sign, because it does mean you have men there that are not just women.
Look, Australia is still a bit old-fashioned, but they're old-fashioned in a way that they settle their differences in a punch-up. That's how it's very, very rare you see a gun or a knife in a fight here in Australia. It's everybody wants to be they want to do it the old-fashioned way, where you punch your enemy to the point of maybe they pass out, then you stop and say, well, okay, I've told them to listen, and you start helping them, putting them in the right brace position, call an ambulance, and actually, I've seen funny scenes where people have the punch up and they have two shiner each, and then going back into the bar having a pint with each other.
Yeah, I've heard of things like that. Yeah, that's a hopeful sign. What would happen, like in the old days, I don't think this was even a question, but in a case like that, would you automatically be headed for an arrest for assault and battery? I mean, what happens if there's just a bar fight, for instance?
Oh no, the police here are quite interesting. The way I've seen this in front of me, where they separate the two people who are fighting, and they kind of not trying to sort of stimulate them to press charges. They go, are you guys okay? Do you need help or not? So they kind of, they're two guys settling their own differences, and they leave it at that. There is no arrest or anything. Yeah. Yes, it's quite good in that way, because they don't want to, they don't want to make it bigger than what it is. It's a couple of guys who had a few drinks and they ended up in a fight, and that's probably the end of the story. And you learn a couple of lessons, as you get older in life, you know which buttons to push and which not to at some point. But they leave that learning curve. As long as nobody is terminally hurt or something is being used, like you've used a bottle or trying to glass somebody, but if it's just a fist fight, it's left at that. Where I live, so but that's the thing. I mean, and when you mentioned the United States and the way it was looked at in the past as a country to look up to, still the founding fathers and the American Constitution is one of the best ever written by man. It had lots of hope for how a new system is going to emerge and how society will organize itself. So the United States for quite some time has been a pioneer and a country to look up to. But just in the last few decades, there's something brewing that's taken away from that feeling.
Yeah, a lot of things, yes.
It's probably not just the guns. We're talking about multiple facets. Some people are mentioned here, the moral decline in the American society. So maybe the use of the guns are now completely, people are just having a bad day and they start using a gun, rather than used to be like for desperate measures. I'm using the gun as the last resort. I'm going to use it, but it has to be a proper threat. But now you get a couple of kids who's like, oh, I've been bullied. I'm going to turn on everybody and kill every mofo, Could that be it? The fragile society?
Well, it is. But one of the big things behind the violence epidemic is the breakdown of the family unit. The incredible percentage of out-of-wedlock births. And that's not just some kind of puritanical shame, you should have gotten married before you had kids. No, the idea that the father is not present to help the young males learn how to be a male. The great book on this was Robert Bly's Iron John a couple of decades ago, which really zeroed in on this problem, that the masculine energy that you need to learn to channel, and that traditional societies provide that help through fathers and or uncles. You have that less and less in our society. Plus the number of single mothers, they're doing their job, but that's not the only job that needs to be done by parents. The welfare system, the LBJ, was a major corrupter of the country. He was explicit about buying off African Americans for their votes, and he created the welfare system that destroyed their families. And when you don't have the family structure, you're in big trouble. And the idea of not this anti-natalism idea that I don't really want to spend all the money and the time necessary to raise kids. I just want to have fun. That's very dangerous too, especially since the more intelligent and successful you are, the less likely these days you are to have kids, and so you're flooding the population with the people least likely to be responsible. And on it goes. There's manhood is asserted through gang violence. The impulse is quite proper, but the expression is not. And they need the family structure to show how this needs to be directed. And so, and I mean, some gay organizations actually say they want to destroy the institution of marriage. I'm assuming and hoping that's a minority, but there are all sorts of plans afoot. Well, Black Lives Matter. In the original manifesto they had online, they said one of their goals is to destroy the nuclear family so that the state controls all children, or as Hitler, he said, it takes a gulag, a village, and so forth. There's all kinds of things to break down society, and fingers crossed somebody will come up with something better, but it doesn't look too much better to me. So all these things are happening, this Green New Deal nonsense. This is just sacrificing people. It's like Stalin said, you can't make an omelet without breaking eggs. Bill Gates, all these creeps, they're trying to reduce the population and so forth. It's like we are in perilous times with mad, crazy people in charge.
Yeah. But you see, I'm an anti-natalist. I don't have kids. I've been with my wife for 25 years. But we kind of both agree, but it's for philosophical reasons.
Well, I'm not making a judgment in any given case. It's like Aquinas said about priestly celibacy. If everybody did this, it would be wrong. But of course, it's never going to happen that way.
Exactly. Yeah.
So the individual choices, that's with many of these issues. The individual choice is to be allowed and affirmed. But if it goes if more and more people go a certain way, we're in big trouble. Maybe it's the inevitable decline of the civilization. Yeah.
Well, species have about 2 million years lifespan. I'm not sure. I mean, they're talking about Israel was threatening Iran today, and saying if they're going to develop nuclear weapons, we might have a preemptive war. A preemptive war on Iran from Israel.
Iran or Iraq?
Iran.
Oh
yeah. And Israel was sort of
do that.
But then you've got yourself a big problem. Then if you have pockets of wars, what happens in history is going to end up repeating itself.
One thing I don't want to see repeated is the Shoah, because these people in Iran are lunatics who say they want to destroy Israel and Jews, and they'll do it. What do you think they want the nukes for?
The apocalyptic. Yeah. But the repercussions of this, because remember, there's a lot of Iranians who are sort of opposing the regime right now. Remember Iran's in the 70s. Those who are too young to know, remember Shah Iran in the 70s, and Sadat of Egypt, and Menachem Begin of Israel. If you look at the 70s in Iran, Oh, most beautiful. The girls are great looking, and the guys, and they were quite liberal, and the mini skirts and the Beatles. This was a different Iran. It's just 40 years ago, 50 years ago.
Mhm.
And but you might end up having a resurgence. There is obviously, I do my Arabic contents, and I can tell you, there's a big movement in the Middle East. Huge movement of people saying enough is enough. Enough is enough. We want to join the world. We want to be part of. We want to. Yeah, you have a one lifetime. Probably more, we don't know if there's more, but the one that you've got, you want to enjoy it. You want to live it in a way where you're thinking, well, I've enjoyed my trip, my rides. And you don't want to be miserable. Lots of people want to be in that. I'm not going to waste my life. I want to have a bit of fun while learning a few things along the way and contributing to the world I'm living in. A couple of good things. And there's a lot of people are thinking like that, and I can see that in the Arabic world is happening. It will take a few generations, but it's on the way. And the problem is you don't want to see multiple wars.
Right.
Russia, Ukraine. If you see Russia, Ukraine, Israel, Iran, and you have something, a couple of, it distorts the world order, and then this could be a third world war brewing.
Oh yeah, shockingly true. I compare this to the wildfires in California. You don't want them there, but they started due largely to human failure, the idiotic policies they had to that didn't prevent these things, their poor management of the environment. But nonetheless, you got all these wildfires that then join up to be a horrible apocalyptic conflagration. Well, what are you going to do? You want to stop those fires, and that's kind of what these wars are. Like, if Israel does preemptively attack Iran, that might be the best thing. And if Russia is defeated and realize, we're not going to be able to take back all of the old Soviet empire after all, it's a big risk. But what's the alternative? You're just going to say, better red than dead. I don't think so. We are living in dangerous times. That's for sure.
Jefferson's putting a nice thought experiment here. And here's a thought exercise. Imagine yourself and a group of strangers on a deserted island. Would you feel more comfortable if only one person had a gun, or if everyone, including you, had a gun? I have to say, the first thing I've spotted here, I've spotted a false dichotomy or a false dilemma, because there's a third option. And the third option was, how about none of us have a gun?
Yeah. But if somebody does, what's you're talking about from ground zero.
From ground zero.
Better, option.
Yeah, it would be nice. But if one had a gun, you because you would have to you don't know what that kind of, this person could end up being a great person. He would use the gun for the welfare of the group, driving wolves and other wild animals away. Or it could be a horrible person who would end up killing all the men and taking all the women for himself. So you never know. So once you've introduced, the problem is with the introduction of that first gun. Once you've introduced one, it has to be a fair playing field for everyone.
Like in that Star Trek episode where the Hill people and whatever the other group was, Kirk knowingly started an arms race because it was the only way to avoid one side just getting destroyed by the other, who were given an advantage by the Klingons. And that's the terrible balance of terror.
Yeah. I'm just saying, I'm honestly not a big fan of that detached killing. To be able to, it's like poisoning, leaving some poison in somebody's. It's almost like a cowardly way to kill.
Yeah.
it's just, like, face up to a man, and obviously, and that's what the modern technology has done. You could be a nerd with absolutely no muscle group whatsoever, and he can take, with a machine gun, he can just hoover over multiple guys who each one of them can actually take you down at ease. And to me, maybe I'm a bit of maybe the superhero culture in my head still stands for, even when you are in a fight situation, there's a bit of novelty. There's a bit of I don't know, a protocol to engage. I don't like the coward nature of humanity, of detaching the killing, because it's such a personal thing to do, and it will change your life forever. So if you're gonna do it, you're gonna do it in a way that will change your life forever, because it's gonna be, you've done that. But just shooting somebody from afar, or poisoning their food, and not even seeing them while they die, you put some poison in somebody's food and leave, and you hear in the news the next day, they've died. How cowardly that is, and how detached, and it just absolutely, I don't like it.
Yeah, that's what China is doing by unleashing the bio weapon of the COVID virus, and by sending fentanyl to their buddies in the cartels in Mexico to bring into the United States and kill off the youth. It's they never see anybody that they've killed, basically, but they've let go these apocalyptic disasters, and at a safe distance for them.
Here is an idea for our next controversial conversation. We'll talk about whether COVID is a virus that sort of emerged of natural causes, or is it a weapon that has been manufactured? Would be quite an interesting conversation.
Or does it even exist as a separate virus? From what I hear, it's never been isolated. That is identified, and that it may just be some kind of flu. And that it's kind of like the same problem with HIV. That's not even one thing. There are a bunch of usually benign HIV viruses, and it's not. And there's a very long incubation period before your immunity starts breaking down. So some have wondered, is there really an HIV/AIDS thing going on? Because you're not killed by AIDS. It's always some pneumonia or this or that. What a mess. I'm ignorant of it, and I'm not going to make a career out of trying to master all the information.
So how about this? Next time we're having this conversation, I am going to bring another guest speaker who is a surgeon, a doctor in Australia here. And he's also a virologist. So that would be quite an interesting conversation, because he can back up the science, and he's Egyptian but ex-Christian. He left Christianity, so he's quite scientific, and he would tell us if there is something dodgy, because they can tell from the genoming of virus whether it's manufactured or it's naturally occurring. It can actually, the fingerprint of manufacturing will be quite evident, and he will be able to tell us the difference.
Great. That's true.
So that'll be a great conversation. So next week, guys, we'll talk about COVID. I'm sure everybody's sick of COVID, but we're going to talk about it in a different light.
Terrific.
Well, it looks like, I hope that all people in the United States are safe. I'm hoping that this is going to stop. I don't think it's going to stop in a hurry. But it's one of those things that really upset me when I hear the news, especially when I hear about kids who are about to start life and they're all hopeful. And imagine the loss of potential. Out of those 22, it could have been the next president of the United States, or the next doctor who's going to invent something to save humanity. It's just a loss of potential.
What really makes me heartsick is what Carol tells me about her teaching experience, that all these young kids coming from poverty-stricken homes, many of them raised by their grandparents because their parents are drug addicts and they're in jail and all that, very limited exposure to anything. When Carol would tell them fairy tales, they never heard of this stuff. When she would tell about Greek myths, they loved it, but they never heard it. And I spoke to a kindergarten class she was teaching about superheroes. And I found it was an amazing situation that these kids were no different than like grad students I had taught. They were bright, they had questions and opinions, but they're just nowhere. They're not given the resources or the time, and who knows what they might be able to do if they were encouraged and given resources.
Thank you, Constellation Pegasus, for the super chats. And he's saying, I'm planning on buying a Confederate black powder pistol soon. I have no problems with that. Are these kind of ceremonial? They're kind of more like antique type of pistols, I guess. So they're not obviously for use. But there's no problem at all of having. I mean, you've got a few swords in the back. You've got an antique gun. I kind of find that kind of fascinating type of stuff. Don't have a problem with that whatsoever, because you get the other extremes, like, oh, you show me a gun, that means you're a horrible person. Not necessarily. That's the wacky other side of the equation. Not to, and sometimes we do know that guns do save lives. So if you are faced with, if there's if that guy with the semi-automatic rifle, and there was a guy with a handgun who happened to be at school, let's say a father who is licensed to carry a gun, and seized the moment and shot him dead and saved the lives of 22 people. He would have been a hero by now, right? He would have been a hero. And he would have used the same tool that this guy was going to use to, so again, you've got all these tools, and you've got to know when to use them. That's probably how it's going to have to be at some point.
I would recommend, if anybody has access to this, and you probably do, if you've never seen the 60s Western series, The Rifleman, this is really great because Lucas McCain, the rifleman, he's a rancher, but he's also like a crack shot. And he winds up frequently having to kill people. But it's very clear. He talks to his young son about this. He said it's always the last resort and so forth. And there are a couple of episodes where they try gun control in the town, and horrible things happen. And it's so brilliantly done as a morality play without being preachy. And it has to do with violence in a violent world, but somebody maintaining their moral integrity. I would recommend anybody watching this. The plots are fascinating. It's just half-hour episodes. Great stuff.
I agree. I thank you very much, Bob. I mean, this was an exciting conversation. It's a lot of people on different sides of the equation, but it seems, again, one more time, dialogue is the only way.
Amen.
You've got to have all parties talking about that. This is a problem. When a little child is killed, the killer is not going to know the difference whether this child has a parent who is a Democrat or Republican. It does not matter. It's gonna end up happening to all walks of life in the United States. So this is a conversation that needs to be had by all. We all have stake in this. Even humanity is looking at from the outside, because you don't want to see. Empathy has taught us that if some other nation is feeling the atrocities of whatever, we still feel for them because we don't want this to happen to us. So that's the only thing to do at this point. Thank you all for those who watched. And next week we're going to be discussing whether COVID is an orchestrated plot by the Chinese, or whether it's a regular occurrence that happens once in every 100 years or so. Thanks very much, and goodbye.